my name is Emma Gossett, and I'm a lead budget and policy analyst at IBO on the education team. In this video, we'll walk through highlights from IBO's education indicators. IBO's indicators brings together statistics on enrollment, attendance, and achievement, as well as student, teacher, and principal demographics. Indicators also track school building capacity and other key measures of the city's public school system. This year, IBO has also introduced a spotlight on students in temporary housing, given the challenges that this population faces. Taken together, these data points offer a comprehensive view of New York City's public school system. IBO intends education indicators to serve as a resource and a data source to factor into discussions and decisions about future investments and educational programs and resources. So the first thing we're going to go over today is enrollment. According to National Center for Education Statistics, across the country, public school enrollment has declined since the COVID-19 pandemic. In fall of 2019, U.S. public schools enrolled about 50.8 million students, but by the fall of 2020, that number dropped by 3%. It ticked up slightly in 2022, and it reached 49.6 million. Here in New York City, IBO's education indicators shows the same story of overall decline, but the details look different by borough and school type. In 2019-20, the traditional public school enrollment hovered around 1 million students. It now stands at 906,000 students in the 2024 school year. Now looking at this year's indicators, the level of decline for traditional public school enrollment differed by borough. While the Bronx and Manhattan both declined in enrollment for traditional public schools by around 1.5%, Brooklyn's enrollment declined by 0.15%, Queens by 0.37%, and Staten Island by 0.11%. Charter school enrollment tells a different story. Citywide charter enrollment has been steadily growing since the pandemic, increasing from around 130,000 students to around 150,000. The trend is not consistent by borough. This past school year, the Bronx saw a 9.5% increase in charter enrollment, while charter enrollment in Manhattan declined by around 8%. While overall enrollment in New York City mirrors the national decline, the split between traditional public schools and charters stands out. Traditional public schools have continued to lose students, while charter school enrollments have expanded slightly. Now let's turn to attendance. Each year, indicators tracks how often students are in school, alongside measures of chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is defined by the New York State Education Department and refers to students who missed more than 10% of their school time. In 2023 to 2024, nearly 1 in 3 New York City public school students was considered chronically absent. Chronic absenteeism also increases as students get older. In elementary school grades, about 31% of students were chronically absent, but by high school, chronic absenteeism climbed to nearly 35% of students. Attendance also varies by student group. Indicators show that Asian students have the lowest chronic absenteeism rates, while Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students have higher rates. Students with disabilities, English language learners, and students in poverty and in temporary housing also experience absenteeism at higher rates than their peers. One group that stands out in particular is students in temporary housing. These students face significant barriers to consistent attendance. Education indicator shows that chronic absenteeism among students in temporary housing is nearly double the rate of students in permanent housing across all grade levels. This difference underscores the unique challenges that these students face, from the instability of frequent moves to long commutes between shelters and schools. Why does attendance matter? Because attendance is correlated with achievement outcomes. Indicators shows that students with stronger attendance records also tend to have higher proficiency rates in both math and English language arts. What do we mean when we talk about proficiency? IBO looked at proficiency rates on state tests for students in grades 3 through 8 to help measure achievement outcomes. Based on scores, students are assigned to one of 4 achievement groups based on their scores. Those are level 1 through level 4. Level 1 and level 2 are not considered proficient, while levels 3 and 4 are considered proficient. For students in grades 3 through 8, attendance is highly correlated with performance on state exams. Those who attend schools at least 90% of the time have ELA proficiency rates of about 55%. In contrast, students who are chronically absent see their proficiency rates drop sharply to about 25%. When it comes to high school students taking Regents exams, pass rates for traditional public school students are again highly correlated with attendance. Students who exhibit good attendance score pass rates on the English Regents of around 81% on average, while students who are severely chronically absent, which means 20% or more of days are missed, hover around 54%. Looking at attendance alongside performance provides context. While IBO's indicators aren't measuring if lower attendances causes lower test scores, these indicators flag that the two may be related, or other factors like housing instability, health conditions, or poverty may shape student experiences in ways that affect their attendance and their learning. These connections have become even more important in the wake of COVID-19, as discussions about attendance, achievement, and broader socioeconomic impacts continue to evolve. The trends for race and ethnicity for both teachers and principals are different within just those two categories, but also as compared to students. They're quite different.
Hispanic students made up the highest share of traditional public school enrollment in the 2023 to 2024 school year. For charter schools, Black students made up the highest share, closely followed by Hispanic students.
So what we can see here on this chart is that in this most recent school year, most teachers were white, right? It's 40,600. And the next closest are Hispanic teachers, which is 14,000. So it's quite a difference. And then for principal race and ethnicity, we see big differences by race and ethnicity. And those aren't necessarily mirrored by the student demographics. District 75 is New York City's self-contained district. So it is a district specifically. It is not a geographic district in the way that 1 through 32 are. District 75 is a district that specifically serves students with disabilities who need more support than they can receive in a District 1 through 32 general education classroom. And so this chart here is showing the share of special education teachers, because those teachers are in all districts. So this just shows the breakout between District 75 and Districts 1 through 32. Building utilization is a pretty simple formula. It is just enrollment, so the number of total students and the number of seats that there are. So enrollment over capacity. So that at a very baseline is just what the utilization rate is. And so we use that utilization rate to determine whether buildings are overutilized. So are there too many students for the number of the seats that there are, or is it underutilized? Are there extra seats and too few students for those seats? This year's building indicators showed relatively consistent year-over-year utilization rates. So that's for both students and for buildings. So if we're looking at this chart right here, we can see that from last year and the year prior, the rates for the number or the percent of overutilized buildings and the percent of students in overutilized buildings, those have stayed consistent. So this year, 34.5% of students were in overutilized buildings and 28.8% of buildings were overutilized. So again, that's just, it has stayed pretty consistent year over year, but that is the utilization rate. So AC Access is a new section, and it's also a part of a recent report that we put out on buildings. In indicators, we break it out by school district, so community school district. It's 1 through 32, based on where you are in the city, and you can scroll through by borough to break it out, but it'll tell you for each district what is the air conditioning access.
For example, in District 14, we can see that 74% of the area within those buildings has AC. In this year's Education Indicators, IBO is using a new measure of poverty. Previously, IBO identified student neighborhoods as lower income using a city-specific poverty threshold calculated by the mayor's office. In our old measure, we didn't label students as being in poverty, they were labeled as being from low-income neighborhoods. This year, we use the New York City Department of Education's poverty measure, which uses individual indicators. Due to this change, year-over-year comparisons with previous indicators are not possible for poverty indicators. As an example, in the 2022 to 2023 school year, 13% of students in public schools, grades 9 to 12, were from low-income neighborhoods. In 2023 to 2024, 77.6% of students in public schools, grades 9 to 12, were considered to be in poverty. So these are both valid measures, but the key point here is that there are different ways to measure poverty, at the neighborhood income level, like we did in previous years, or via individual indicators, which is what we switched to this year.
This year, IBO's Education Indicators spotlights students in temporary housing as a new portion of this IBO resource. Students in temporary housing are students in grades 3K through 12, living in shelters, doubled-up housing, in places like hotels and motels, awaiting foster placement, or other temporary living situations. In 2023 to 2024, about 846,000 students lived in permanent housing, but more than 130,000 were in temporary housing. 68,000 were doubled up with another family, 57,000 in a shelter, and about 6,000 in other temporary housing. This breakdown looks different by grade. Elementary students were the most likely to be in a shelter, while middle school students were the most likely to be doubled up. Attendance data shows a clear gap. In elementary school, students in permanent housing attended about 92% of the time, compared with 87% for those in temporary housing. The same pattern held in both middle and high school. Chronic absenteeism tells an even sharper story. About half of students in temporary housing were chronically absent, compared with about a quarter of those in permanent housing. Achievement gaps also stand out. On the state English exam for grades 3 through 8, 52% of permanently housed students scored proficient, compared with 32% of doubled up students, and just 22% of students in shelter. Math results show a similar divide. Regents' pass rates in high school showed smaller gaps, but the difference didn't disappear. New York City did add a new fair student funding rate for these students in 2023 to 2024, which meant an average of about $78 per pupil. But the challenges these students face go far beyond funding formulas. IBO's Spotlight highlights how deeply housing instability impacts students in their attendance, in their achievement, and in their day-to-day school experience.
Now that we've identified this demographic of student in temporary housing, in the coming year, we are keeping an eye on these metrics and how they might shift over time, especially with the changes to the Fair Student Funding Formula.
IBO's education indicators are a tool for understanding New York City schools. They provide detailed data on enrollment, demographics, and resources across boroughs, school types, and student subgroups. By looking beyond city totals, indicators can highlight where trends differ and how patterns have changed over time. This resource is intended to help the public, educators, and decision makers interpret and better understand the landscape of the city's public schools.